Well, we are in week 3. That's not going to be smooth at all. We are in week 3 of our series, Games We Play, where we're talking about competition. We're talking about games. And man, I don't know if you guys heard, but like at 6:15 this morning, our 5-year-old slammed through our room and said, "Daddy, it's Super Bowl Sunday." And so we're on a day that's really shaped by competition, aren't we? Like the entire world is sort of looking towards this. So I got a question. Who do you got? Who's your team? Anybody here for the Kansas City Chiefs? I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. Get it for that. The Chiefs. No, who's here for Chiefs or Taylor's boyfriend's team? That kind of thing. Yeah, we got that. We got the Eagles here. Anybody here for the Eagles? Oh my gosh. Oh man, I might be leading a church that has a heart for the underdogs if we're those people. I want to be honest with you, I'm torn personally because, we are witnessing greatness in what Kansas City's doing and the chance for a three-peat. That's pretty cool, I guess. But I love the underdogs, like I said. I'm a person for the underdogs, and as an Indiana sports team fan, you're always underdogs. But anyway, it's hard for me to root for the Eagles some because I can't think of a different culture, like an opposite culture from Hoosier hospitality than Philadelphia, all right? But it's going to be quite the game. I hope it's a good game. But I think like today is just a day that shows how sports and games and competition have shaped our culture so much that even if you're not into football, there are other kind of ways to enjoy Super Bowl Sunday. So the cutest game going on today is the Puppy Bowl. Really, really cute. I'm glad I'm not in the room with all the puppy pee smell though. I got to be honest with you about that. But it's going to be really cute coming on the Animal Planet. If you got little kids that can't pay attention for a long 3.5 hour, probably 4 hour game tonight, they had this, Nickelodeon did this last year with augmented reality, like add some slime to the football game, right? And they did this during a wild card game. And come on, who's not going to pay attention closer to what the announcers are doing when SpongeBob is in the booth calling the plays? Like, come on, it's ridiculous. But even if you're not into sports at all, not into Super Bowl at all, who's here for the snacks today, right? Yes. So yeah, we're going to have like the spreads are going to be unreal, wings and nachos and like all the different things. How many different things can Americans do with cheese? There is no bounds to our ingenuity. It's amazing, right? So we got that. I saw this ad. So if you're really looking to up your Super Bowl party game, you can do a snack stadium. I'm sure this is really affordable right now. But yeah, lots of different ways to do the snacks. But yeah, so we're looking forward to a fun evening, fun afternoon. Hey, who thinks that we should make Monday after the Super Bowl a holiday? I was expecting a huge applause there. You guys like staying up late and going to work the next morning, I guess. But anyway, I would love that. I think we should move it around to make Monday after the Super Bowl part of the holiday season, whatever. But anyway, we are talking about games, right? But we're not talking about those kind of games. We're talking about the games we often play inside of our relationships, in our relational lives, at home, at work, where we play, where we hang out with people. There's oftentimes that we play those games in relationships, but there's been a warning that when we play games in our relationships, everybody loses. We've said it this way throughout the series, that relationally speaking, a game that requires a loser is a game that no one wins. You might win that argument, but you create a bigger chasm in your relational life, in your home, in your marriage, because you push them down and you gloat and you win. But what do you really win, right? And so we've talked about this. Last week we talked about the blame game and how easy it is for us to point the finger out at other people instead of assuming responsibility to actually instill change. It's just easier for us to point out at other people. Today we're going to talk about a different relational game that I'm going to encourage you to box up, throw away, burn the trash can, whatever it takes to get rid of it, because this is a game that is so toxic. This is a game that you can play with somebody, but they don't even ever know it, and oftentimes you play it all alone while somebody else lives rent-free in your head. It's a game that will create a chasm so wide in your relational world and create you to limp through your everyday life in a less than way. The game we're talking about today is the comparison game. Comparing ourselves with other people. It is toxic in your life and it is toxic in your relationships, and it starts really young, doesn't it? I remember when our oldest son, Jack, was 3 years old, he was trying to race some of the neighbor girls in our neighborhood to see how fast they all were, and the girls beat him every time, and he goes, "Oh, the girls are just faster than me." And I'm like, "Yeah, buddy, it might be that way for a long time, actually, maybe forever." But it was like so quick to be like, I don't measure up. I'm not as fast as them. Or anybody that has kids and, they have a friend who gets a toy. Maybe that first friend that gets the video games or the phone. And they're like, why can't I have that? They have that. And they compare their lot in life to what their friends have, right? This starts at an early age. It's a deeply human problem. We get into school. I remember being in 3rd and 4th grade, and it was the first time as a boy I actually cared about the clothes that I wore and my style, if you will. And I just remember like the very first time somebody was wearing something that was considered cool and I did not have. It was the Old Navy performance fleece tech vests, modeled by Tia and Tamara from Sister, apparently. But anyway, like these were so cool. Like, who needs sleeves? I'm so healthy and I'm so stylish in my tech vest, right? Thing going on. I love that. And then I remember just a few years later, there was a brand that people were wearing, and it just meant so much when you saw this brand on their shirt, and it was crazy expensive and nobody's parents wanted to pay for it, but it was a status symbol right here. Abercrombie and Fitch. Any like elder millennials remember this? I remember the first time I went to the Fashion Mall in Indianapolis and I wanted to go into the store and it was like dark in there and you just hear the I felt like I had to show an ID before I walked in to get a t-shirt kind of thing. But like people wore this and they were the cool kids and this was way too expensive, not a great quality, but like this was the thing that people were doing. And I remember thinking, if I don't have that, I'm not in like those guys are cool like those guys are cool. I remember it was the very first time I started thinking about doing something with my hair outside of just rolling out of bed. And there are no pictures of this, but thank God there's no pictures of this. But I remember it was the first time I wanted to put product in my hair. And so gel became a thing when I was in middle school. And it was not any kind of gel. LA Looks Mega Hold all the way forth. Because you could like do this in the morning, big block, mohawk until 8th period. I'm telling you, it could really happen. It changed the game in that way. And there's also no pictures of this, but there was a style that happened maybe just for 1 year, but it would be little highlights like frosted tips. And I would gel every one of my frosted tips down the front of my face like a bear claw. So cool, so stylish, right? And there are no pictures of this. And please do not go searching for pictures of this. You can find a different church if you do so. Just kidding. But I remember thinking like, this is what everybody's doing. I've got to have this. I've got to look like this. Give me the LA Looks, big blob in my hair. But this doesn't just happen in our style. Like as we get older in school, we start to see where we stand in the pecking order compared to other people. With academics, you had honors classes, AP classes, and then you had the dreaded normal classes where you're like, oh, I'm not as smart as those kids over there. When you start like, boys start liking girls, girls start liking boys, the whole kind of thing inside of school, you're split up into being single or dating, or we called it going out, but we were too young to actually go on dates, but going out or single. And so you were segmented knowing where you were being desired in school. In sports, you had the dreaded A team or B team or C team, and then you had JV or varsity, and you knew where you stood with your skill levels there. And then as we end high school, you have your GPA, your class ranking. You really clearly see where you stand there and what school you're going to go to after high school or what kind of career you want to pursue after school. This is something that's ingrained into our development in our adolescence, right? But here's the thing I want us to all pick up on today. Even though we are not kids anymore, many of us, we never stopped playing the comparison game. The stakes just got a lot higher. Things just got a lot more expensive. We never stopped playing the actual game at all. Research shows today that 1 out of every 10 thoughts that we have as adults is one of comparing ourselves to other people, seeing where we measure up. Social media has made the comparison game kind of this like compulsive hobby that we have to compare other people's highlights that we see on our little screens versus our everyday life. And we're always measuring ourselves up against other people. There have been developments in our culture that make us still play the comparison game today, like this dreaded network that changed everything and made everything more expensive in our homes, HGTV. There was a time we didn't even know what shiplap was, but now we have to have it. There was a time where we just didn't ask the question, is that a load-bearing wall so I can make this room open concept? We didn't used to ask these questions at all, but HGTV, as we're sitting in our homes watching other people's beautiful homes take shape, we're like, yeah, I want to change this. I don't have as nice as a house as they have. We have vacations, and we talk to people about their vacations, and we might have just had a staycation, staying home, and we're like hearing somebody else talk about their swim-up pool right up to their room, and people were bringing me drinks with little umbrellas in it. Oh, it was just a glorious time. And you're like, yeah, I was in my home in Kokomo, or I was in my rental in Muncie, my timeshare in Muncie, and it just wasn't quite the same, right? The toys that we have today. Like, it's an amazing thing how so often, like, we think we're okay with our smartphones, and then we see somebody else has the new model, and we're like, oh, the screen is that much bigger. The battery life is 10 minutes longer. Oh, I must have that. My phone is trash now. And we think we've got to move on to the next thing because we see somebody else that has it. And it happens in our careers, right? We see people that are moving forward in their career, having upward mobility in their industry, and their business is booming, and they're hiring people. And we think, oh, that's really great. That's not what's happening with me. Or I never thought that I would still be at this level of work when I was this age, and now look how much farther along they are than me. We compare ourselves over and over and over again. And in this comparison, it leads to envy. It leads to jealousy. And it sucks the life out of us. There are two major forms of comparison I think we participate in as humans often. The first one is this. We call it downward comparison. This is when we stand from a place and we look down on people because we know that we've got it better than them. And we look down on them and we're like, well, like my marriage isn't perfect, but I'm not on those dating apps and they're single and that must be terrible. So I'm looking down on them. Or I know my business isn't booming, but like I'm not having to let people go and I'm not having to close my doors, right? So we look down on them. And there's something that's insidious that happens inside of our minds when we play this downward comparison game is we start to think like, I don't just have a nicer car or a better car. I'm a better person. I'm of more value than them. I'm just smarter than they are. And I make the right decisions and these people make the wrong decisions. And that's why I'm above them. You know the outcomes of a downward comparison when we look down on others? Oh, superiority. Thinking I've got it all together. I've got all the answers. At least I have a lot more than they have. We start to value ourselves over them. Not only that, but man, we're so critical of the decisions that other people make because we might have turned right when they turned left and they find themselves in a different spot. So we become super critical, judgmental, this air of superiority around us when we look down and compare down other people. And honestly, often, a lot of times, the reason that we do downward comparison when we look down on other people is because we feel so bad and we failed so much at the other style of comparison that we come to downward comparison. The other style of comparison, where I want to spend most of my time and energy today talking about, is, did you already change it? Okay, upward comparison. This is when we're down here and we're looking up and we're saying, oh, they have everything. They have something that I don't have. I want what they have. And a lot of times we fail at this, and this is why we go into the downward comparison thing. But this is so insidious, guys. This is so easy for us to look out at other people like they've got it all together and I have nothing. In upward comparison, it is this dark thing that happens inside of us where we envy, we are jealous for what we don't have and what they have. We enter into thinking along the lines of what I like to call the land of the land of ER. Man, if I was just skinnier like they were, if I was just smarter like they are, if I was richer like they are, then I would really have it made. If I had a newer car, if I had a bigger house, if I was popular, I know that doesn't really work, then I would really have it made. When we're looking up at people, we think like, man, they're my goal, they're my aspiration. They have what I don't have, and I want it. And we just find ourselves in this place where we're just always looking and scratching and clawing for more. And you know, the darkest part of this upward comparison and this land of that we live in is when we throw at our spouses or our partners. Man, if you were just this, if you were just more this, then we'd have no problems. And I'm telling you, it is toxic in our relational life. It is toxic in our world. And honestly, I want to be real with you. Like, this is not something that I've graduated from. This is not something that I am speaking downward looking at you with. This is something that's a struggle for me. And some of the moments that I am least proud of in my life is when I was playing this upward comparison game. And I just wanted what other people had, and it made me towards other people. I remember I had a friend who wanted to go out to lunch with me, went to McAllister's. I know exactly where we were sitting. And this was during a time when Megan and I were struggling with infertility. For 5 or 6 years, we were struggling to have kids, even though we wanted to start a family. And we were just in this really hopeless season, it felt like. And my friend looked at me and goes, hey, man, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's kind of crazy. Like, we got pregnant and we weren't even trying. And I'm sitting there with my like plastic fork and I'm like breaking it with my hands. And I'm trying to be like, oh, that's so awesome. Because I should have been so happy for him. I should have been so happy for them. But I couldn't see beyond what I didn't have. And it made me respond in an ugly way. I'm not proud of it. There have been times I've been sitting with other church leaders and pastors where they're explaining what God's doing in their church and all the awesome stuff happening in their community. And I'm nodding my head like, yeah, that's awesome. And there have been times when I'm like cynical in myself, like, oh yeah, it's easy to do in that community. Or you have this going on for you. You have all the money there. That's why you can do that. And I start to get really cynical. And I start to think like, well, that's not really happening there. They're probably exaggerating, right? Instead of just celebrating what God is doing someplace else, I can be jealous and envious of why it might not be happening in my little castle of the whole kingdom. And I'm not proud of that. Some of the darker instincts that we have, I think, are jealousy and envy that comes from comparison. And what's fascinating to me, and it's actually encouraging to me, that in our Bibles, this vast text of ancient religious sacred texts, thousands of years from different cultures have been cultivated and stored and compiled for us. Like in that Bible, jealousy, envy, and comparison, it shows us it's a human issue. This has always been around. And there's no place in our Bibles that speaks to it more sharply and succinctly than in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. Here's where the wisdom literature is. It's the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And here's a simple definition. Wisdom literature are ancient biblical texts that speak to how God's world actually works, what the good life looks like, and how to avoid and walk through suffering. Sometimes to avoid suffering, and other times to walk through the eventual suffering that we go through. And inside of this wisdom literature, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, both of these are attributed to or written by Solomon. And Solomon was King David's son in the story of God's ancient people, the Israelites. And we're told that Solomon was divinely gifted wisdom. He's one of the wisest men who ever lived outside of Jesus. And he also was gifted with opulent wealth, and he had so much. He was at the top of his game. And I want us to know that because what he says about envy and jealousy and comparison, it bites sharper. It's got teeth to it because he was at the top of everything. He had no lack in his life. He had everything he ever wanted. But this is what Solomon says about envy. And this is something you've experienced and I've experienced. And he's just observing something that we all agree on no matter what you believe about God, Jesus, the whole Bible thing. This is what Solomon says. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. It says a heart at peace. The word for peace there is shalom. It's this idea of not just tranquility or a lack of conflict, but everything flowing and in rhythm the way that God in his goodness designed it to be. You in rhythm with one another, you in rhythm with God. It says the heart at peace, the heart in shalom gives life to the body. It's like that's what actually lets you live. But in contrast, envy rots the bones. Jealousy rots the bones. What is rot? Rot is that sign that something is dead or dying. It's less than fully alive. It's limping along. And Solomon says envy rots the bones. It's that sign that you are limping through. You are not flourishing. You are not fully alive. And like I said, we all agree with this, no matter what we think about the Bible, that envy, it suffocates us. It takes the life out of us, especially in our relational world. Where does envy take life away from us? When we're jealous or envious of what somebody else has, you know what happens? We get angry and bitter towards them, even though they did nothing to us. You ever think about that? The people you're jealous of, they did nothing to you. They're not attacking you. They simply just have something that you desire. But we get in our little minds where we're like, oh, I just hate them and my blood pressure rises every time I see them. I can't believe they're doing this again. They're just living their life, living in your head rent-free, my friends. But we get angry and bitter towards them. And Solomon knew this so much because his dad, King David, he was king. And before King David was king, it was King Saul. And Saul hated David because the crowds loved David. They would sing songs about how great David was. And after he vanquished the giant Goliath, and they would think David has slain his tens of thousands, Saul his thousands. And they would sing the song and it drove Saul crazy. And it made thousands of people perish, and it caused all this trauma in his family. And Solomon sees what happened with his dad and King Saul. He's like, man, this is not good for you, this anger and this bitterness. You know what else? How else envy rots the bones in our relationships? It rots the bones in our relationships because we just get into this place where we're super critical and judgmental of people. Like, we never write the most generous narrative about other people and their purchases when there's something that they bought that we want. We never write a generous narrative. We often think, oh, what a nice big house. Oh man, I could probably afford this mortgage if I didn't tithe to Jesus at Bridgeway. But you laugh awkwardly because some of y'all thought it. Or look at their new car. Look at that new car. Oh man, I bet they went into debt for that. Oh man, I hope they enjoy that car payment. They're going to be paying on that forever. Don't you know cars are depreciating assets? Like this whole thing, we get so judgmental about what other people do. It creates a super critical spirit in us. And the last thing, the way that envy rots our relational world, isn't this true? It just sucks the gratitude out of our lives. We get so obsessed with what God's put in front of somebody else that we never even see what's right in front of us. We're getting obsessed with what's in their hands, and we never look down to see what's even been placed in our hands. Envy rots the bones of our relationships in so many different ways. And it's not the way that we were invited to live and created to live. So how do we stop playing the comparison game? How do we push beyond this just simple human behavior that we have of comparing our station in life versus other people's station in life? How do we go beyond it? Somebody tell me, I don't know, I'm not sure. Just kidding, I got some thoughts. That was funnier at the 9 a.m. service, just to let you know. But how do we move beyond the comparison game? Again, I want to go to Solomon. He's writing in a different place in the wisdom literature. He says this in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's some wisdom in here, you guys, that just sets us free. He says this. He's making an observation. Again, he's at the top of his game, the richest man, the most wise person who's living at this time. And he said this, and I saw, he's making an observation, that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. Toil is a word we don't use too often today. It's kind of that emotional exhaustion that we get from work when we feel like we're working all day, but we're not moving the ball down the field. We're banging our head up against the wall. We feel like we're not making a difference. We all have that in our jobs in certain ways where there are things we have to do that just drain us. And Solomon says, I attribute all that toil and all achievement. He says it flows from one person's envy of another. You know, all that pain, that emotional exhaustion that you feel, you know where it comes from? It comes from envy, from jealousy, from comparing yourself to one another. So we're leaning and we're listening like, okay, so why is that, right? Why is that, Solomon? Solomon says this next. This too, all of this envy of one another, this too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon says that when you live your life in the comparison game, it is going to exhaust you. It's going to wear you out. It is going to drain you. And it doesn't even work. It's meaningless. It's an unwinnable game. It's an endless game. It's a game that you cannot succeed in at all. This too, envying one another, is meaningless. And he gives us this word picture. This illustration says it's like a chasing after the wind. It's like saying you can't really do it. You can chase after the wind to try to bottle up in one place and you're going to look really dumb doing it. And you know what? There's going to be wind blowing from another direction. You can't chase after the wind. You can't collect all of the wind. You can't get it all in your grasp. The comparison game, Solomon says again in a different way, is a game that you can't succeed in because there's no end to the comparison game, just like there'd be no end to chasing after the wind. I came across this quote from Bertrand Russell, who was a British philosopher, also a well-known atheist. And I love how he is like speaking God's truth and he doesn't even know it when he says this. But he says this about envy and jealousy. He says, envy consists in seeing things never in themselves, but only in their relations. If you desire glory, you may envy Napoleon. But Napoleon envied Caesar. Caesar envied Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, I dare say, envied Hercules, who never existed. he's picking up right what Solomon is putting down, saying there is no win in the comparison game. There is no end to the comparison game because there's always someone who's going to have more. Always someone who's better, more beautiful, more wealthy. Always someone who has more. You can't win this game. And Russell picks this up. Solomon says this next, the very next verse in this passage. He takes a little aside here. He goes, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. He's making it clear here, like, if you're saying, like, I shouldn't try, I shouldn't work hard, I shouldn't develop anything, like, that's not what Solomon is talking about. He's saying, you know what fools do? They just sort of sit on their hands and they're like, I'm not going to try to do anything, I'm not going to work hard. And Solomon goes, that's not what I'm talking about. When you do this, you will ruin yourself and you will end up ruining other people as well. This is not about not working hard. This is about what envy does in you and through you. And then he says this, the very next sentence. This is where the power of the promise of God shows up. Solomon says, better, richer, more fruitful, one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. It's like, if you want to live beyond the comparison game, lean into this. It's better. It's more fruitful. It's where the life is when you live with one handful than trying and scratching and clawing and grasping and kicking others and beating others down to get your second handful with toil and chasing after the wind. What Solomon is saying, don't miss this, guys, is that each and every one of us, we have been given one handful of blessings from our Heavenly Father. We have all been given something in our hands, one hand, and it's full of things that we often look over and don't even consider. Our families, shelter, our car that gets us to and from work, that phone, that TV, that laptop, that job that we can actually pay the bills with. And they actually give us this thing called paid time off where we get paid when we don't actually work, and we sometimes get to take a vacation days and all those different things. It's easy for us to not see that we've all been given one handful. And here's what you're doing in your head right now, and I know this about you because this is what I do too, is I start to compare my one handful with everybody else's one handful. But don't. Let's savor and focus what's been given in one handful and trust that our one handful is better for us than scratching and clawing and grasping and punching and kicking for somebody else's handful as well. It's better to live with one handful of tranquility, to be a one handful type of person. This is how we overcome the comparison game. It's to be one handful type of people. So let me ask you some uncomfortable questions that I've been wrestling with this week. And I want you to literally let the rubber hit the road in your life with these questions, but I want you to seriously consider it. What will striving for a second handful cost you? Or what has striving for that second handful, what somebody else has that you want, what has it cost you? What can it cost you to be reaching for something else when God's already given you a handful? You could work yourself to death, couldn't you? Just more hours on more hours and more hours, overtime on overtime. And you'd say you're doing it for you and your family, but man, it can kill those relationships that matter the most to you. You can spend yourself into debt to try to have what somebody else has to keep up with the Joneses because you're reaching for that second handful. And now you're trapped. What will it do to your mental health when every time you see this one person that you're playing the comparison game with and they don't even know, your blood pressure rises and you're just hate them, like all these kind of things in your head, right? It's going to cost you in your mental health as well. What will striving for a second handful cost you? What has it already cost you, friends? Here's another question. Where are you chasing after the wind? Where are you letting envy drive your thought life and your feet? Where are you chasing after the wind? In other words, who are you trying to keep up with? Let's do that VH1 pop-up video thing. Boop, boop. Gen X and millennials are right there with me. Who are you trying to keep up with? What did they have that's keeping you from enjoying what God's already placed in your hand? What do they have that you want so much that you won't look down and see what's already placed in your hand? And here's the darker question that I think we can all wrestle with. Who would you secretly love to see fail? I mean, come on, guys. Like, who is that where you see their picture in the paper and your first reaction would be like, it's a dark question, right? But I think we might all have somebody like that. Well, we're playing the comparison game with, and we want to see somebody else punished. We want to rise up in the power rankings. We want to be above them. I think we all have that inside of us, or at least I do. I can only speak for me. But you know what? Man, that's not the kind of thing I want somebody to stand up at my funeral and talk about me. That's not something I want my kids to emulate. That's not who I really want to be. That's birthed from the comparison game, and it doesn't work. It's like we're chasing after the wind. So the last question, this is where I want to challenge you and give us hope and give us a vision for not playing the comparison game in this way. How do we live as one handful people that are just happy with what we have? We don't need to be up and to the right every quarter. We're happy and we're content with what God has placed in our hands. How do we live like one handful people? I think the first thing I want to challenge you with is this. I want to challenge you to trust the story God is writing for you. Trust the provision that God is giving you in this moment. And see that as this is God taking care of you. Our Lord, our Rabbi Jesus talked about this often. And in the greatest sermon ever given, the Sermon on the Mount, he riffs about this because he could tell the people that he was with, they were worrying about things and they were comparing themselves with others and they were scratching and clawing for more. And Jesus, he's so masterful in this teaching. He says this. He says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? To which we all think, yeah, dang, Jesus, that's good. Yeah, that's a good point. He continues and says this. And why do you worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon, nice callback to the wisdom literature, in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you of little faith? He's a good father, Jesus is saying. And he lands this section by saying this. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? For the pagans or people outside of God's family run after all these things, but that's not you. Because he says, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Some of us, this is a faith issue. Often for me, this is a trust in my heavenly Father issue. Do I believe that he will provide? Do I believe that he is enough, that he provided in the past, that he will do it again? Some of us, we need to trust the story that God is writing for us, that he is a good heavenly Father. And that paycheck right now for this season is his provision, and it is enough, and he will provide. My friends, we're one handful of people when we trust the story, trust the provision, trust the character of God that he's shown us and he's given us. Another thought that piggybacks right off of this. I want to challenge us to be people. If we're one handful of people, we've got to run our race. My friends, run your race, not your neighbor's race, not that person that you're competing with, like covertly competing with. No, run your race. Now, I am not a track and field star. Please, no laughter. Okay, that was hard because you wanted to get like, okay. But when I do watch track and field, you see people and they are so focused in front of them. They're not looking to the left and the right. They are looking at their lane. They are following the path that they have in their race. And you know that a runner is in trouble when they start looking to the right or looking to the left or even looking behind them. Something that happens even in their aerodynamics to where they slow down when they do that. But beyond that, oftentimes they stumble and they fall because they're looking at other people in the lanes that they're running in. What would happen if you believe that God has set out a race for you, a story for you? And instead of looking to your left and right, to your neighbor to see what they're doing, you focus on what God has called you to do, the person that he has called you to be, the place where God has called you to work and make an impact, the community that God has called you to make better. Focus in on that and stop comparing yourself. Because it's like chasing after the wind. It's a game you can't win and it never ends, but run your race. And then lastly, We talk about this so often. This is such a powerful practice. I want to challenge you to decide to willfully choose gratitude. To look down at your one handful of what God has given you and savor it and focus on it and thank God for it. Thank others for their role in it. Because in this one handful of blessing, there are things in here that you prayed for years. For years. And God graciously provided. There are blessings in this one handful that you never thought would be possible or a part of your story that now you've just become entitled to, but you need to sit and savor and focus what he's placed in your hand and choose to be grateful for it. And you might need to have systems around this to choose gratitude, because everything in our culture pushes us to think about what the next thing is, but slow down and think of it. Make an alarm in your phone to be grateful for something. Pass the mic metaphorically around your dinner table at home and ask your kids and everybody to share something they're grateful for. Set an alarm so you have this opportunity to share what you're grateful for, but choose to practice gratitude. When we focus on what God's already placed in our hands, we don't have the emotional energy to be looking for another handful. To be looking on what's other people's hands. So choose gratitude. You guys, the comparison game, it's toxic. It will break you down. It will break your relationships down, and you will stumble. And you will falter because you're not walking at your full strength. And I want to encourage you to trust that you have a good heavenly Father who's provided for you in the past, and he will in the future. He's got a story for you, a race for you to run, and you can be grateful for what he's so generously placed in your hand. Because life, the true life, is found when we savor our one handful instead of scratching and clawing and grasping and kicking and punching for another handful from someone else. I pray that you'll choose to be people of the one handful. That's where the life is.